The question of housing has been plaguing the government, and one solution up for discussion is raising some eyebrows. That is the idea of putting a cap on the number of international students. The federal housing minister says this is one of the options the government needs to consider. Sean Fraser is the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Hello, Minister.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Glad to have you. Listen, you certainly attracted some attention when you raised the prospect of putting a cap on international students coming to Canada as a way of easing pressure on the housing market. You also, though, seem to suggest that maybe that was a premature conversation. A lot of people are going to be watching that conversation closely. What kind of timelines are we talking about here in terms of making that decision?
Well, look, I should be clear that the decision on managing the international student program will rest with my colleague, Minister Miller. But I think it's important that we're able to speak openly about the different challenges that communities are facing. Now, the international student program makes extraordinary economic and social contributions to Canada. It contributes tens of billions of dollars to our GDP annually. But what we've seen recently is there's been such rapid growth, given that the program is typically uncapped, that certain communities are having difficulties managing with the population growth that it's attracted. Of course, we still believe in the international student program, but we want to work with institutions in the communities where they exist to make sure it's being managed appropriately. It's not fair for the students who come to be exploited and left without adequate housing. There are some institutions, some private colleges that are not necessarily good actors, but I'm convinced have come to exist for the purpose of exploiting financially those international students who come to Canada. So we want to work with communities and work with institutions the same way we do on our permanent residency programs to make sure that we are growing the housing supply and equipping communities to deal with a growing population. That's just good governance.
Okay, you talk about how to make all of the pieces work here. One of the people that Cabinet heard from today was Professor Mike Moffat. He has argued that colleges and universities should be given funding to build student housing, and if they don't, that they should lose the ability to bring in international students. Would you go that far?
Look, there's different solutions that different people are pitching to help address this challenge, but I don't think anyone disagrees that we need to make sure that we're better aligning our housing, our healthcare, our industrial policy with our immigration policy. Professor Moffat has made the suggestion, as you've indicated. Others have called for a cap. Others still have argued that we should work with institutions to ensure that they're making the necessary investments, not just in housing, but to better support students in their studies and in their integration into the community as a quasi-settlement service provider. There's a number of different options that I think it's smart for us to consider, but at this stage, as we seek to address unique challenges with rapid population growth in centres that hold post-secondary institutions, we ought to consider all of the different options before we make a decision. I think it's important that we canvass the different suggestions that are being made by people who've been studying this, including Professor Moffat.
So what I hear from that, as you give me a list of options and talk about canvassing, is that this is not something that's about to happen, say, in time for next semester. You talk about trends, though, more broadly in terms of what's happening with international students. And of course, you were immigration minister. Now, as I understand it, the number of international students doubled between 2015 and the end of last year, roughly doubled. You were the immigration minister during some of that time. So do you not bear some responsibility for the situation we find ourselves in if the growth has been too exponential?
So one of the things that we should be really clear about is the international student program, including large numbers through the program, is a very good thing for Canada, but we just need to do it in a more organized way. What we saw over the last couple of years in particular is that the program, which is designed, this is not a bug, but a feature, it's driven by the demand that institutions realize that they have for people who want to study from abroad in Canada. We have seen not just public institutions that are long users of the program ramp up their numbers. What we've seen that I'm far more concerned with is an explosion of private colleges who are not necessarily subject to the level of oversight. And keep in mind, there's mixed federal and provincial jurisdiction here, because provinces actually identify the institutions that have access to the international student program today. We've seen an explosion in the number of institutions who are actually taking students and rapidly growing far faster than they're able to accommodate. And I think
Minister,
we do have some work to do with provinces on that.
Yeah, well, why didn't you do anything about it before? I mean, given that we've now reached this point, it's not a brand new problem, as you say.
Yeah, look, there's things that we had been working towards with institutions during the end of my time as the Minister of Immigration. But keep in mind the rapid growth that we saw even in the last year, when we saw a number of students moving into certain communities, really drove home the need to address the challenges impacting people in geographically concentrated pockets across the country. Although the trend has been to increase over time, I think that's a good thing. It's the rapid explosion, including with institutions who don't have a history of treating students very well, that has me primarily concerned, and drives home for me the fact that we need to address the challenges that are putting pressures on those unique communities that host, in some instances, multiple post-secondary institutions.
Pierre Poilievre seems to be accusing you essentially of hypocrisy. He tweeted that you're blaming international students for housing costs when you were the one in charge of the program. What do you say to that?
Look, I think it's really disappointing that anyone would try to be suggesting that one party or another is blaming newcomers. I'd go so far as to suggest I've been the immigration minister who's welcomed more, not just students, but newcomers more broadly into Canada. I was responsible for increasing the number of hours that international students could work so they could help contribute a solution to the labor shortage at the time and better equip themselves to have what they need to take care of themselves and their community. I remain an enormous supporter of the international student program, and I don't think it should be a negative thing that people are willing to talk openly about different challenges that communities are facing and trying to identify the right solutions. I'm going to continue to support the international student program. My hope is that there's not a partisan argument that one side or another is trying to place blame on newcomers. That feels very un-Canadian to me.
Okay, I want to stay focused on other parts of the housing discussion here. I'm hoping we can hit a few more points before we let you go. The Prime Minister said that housing is not primarily a federal responsibility. You know, there's been a lot of back and forth about that, some criticism. Do you think that politically voters are holding your government primarily responsible for the situation we find ourselves in right now?
So first of all, I'd invite anybody who's heard that quote to listen to the second half of the sentence, where he did say we can and we must help address the housing challenges that Canada's facing. But when I talk to people across Canada, including in my own community, what they want from us right now is not to point the finger at who else might be better equipped to solve the problem. They want leadership. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to step into this leadership role, to actually lead the charge to help get more homes built in this country. The reality is when somebody sits down and expresses to you the real anxiety that they're living with, that their families are experiencing, they want you to drive solutions. Some of that will be direct changes to federal policy that we may need to examine, but other areas will require us to incentivize change at different levels of government, with the provinces, with municipalities, and we're not taking any tool off the deck.
Mike Moffat has said it's going to take a wartime effort, like a massive shift in industrial policy in Canada. Is your government ready for something like that?
Absolutely, because we recognize that housing is putting a very real strain on Canadian families, regardless of their dynamic, whether it's seniors who are looking to downsize, students who are living an hour away from campus, households sometimes with two people working who still can't afford a place in the community that they call home. Okay, we want to have an all-hands-on-deck moment. Oh, sorry?
I'm going to just jump in there, Minister, because there's two options I want to talk about before our time with you is up here. Ontario
Certainly
has just put $1.2 billion over 3 years on the table to incentivize municipalities to build. Basically, you build enough, you get access to this money. Is that the kind of thing that your government wants provinces and territories to do?
That's one of the kinds of things, but it is by no means limited to just putting money on the table. Money is part of the solution, but we have to drive systemic reform because money is not the only obstacle. Look at some of the changes that we're inspiring with the Housing Accelerator Fund that's inviting communities to identify local solutions, the way that they zone neighborhoods, the way that they issue permits. Sometimes it's a matter of putting the right infrastructure in place. There's all kinds of different programs that can be solved, not just with money, but by driving changes to the rules that exist today that will incentivize more private development in our communities and get more homes built. We're going to look across a broad range of solutions and implement the most effective ones as quickly as possible. Montreal
tried to incentivize the building of affordable housing, right, by saying that developers, that they essentially would have to pay if they didn't build 20% social affordable housing. 2 years later, zero affordable housing. What lesson do you take from that?
Look, that you have to work with partners and you can't necessarily wash your hands of an issue after you make a policy announcement. One of the things that I've learned over my 8 years as a member of Parliament, and in particular my last couple of years serving as a federal cabinet minister, is that you have to drive change right until you cross the finish line. We're going to have a series of different programs that we get off the ground. Some have launched recently, others will come in the next number of months. But the reality is it's not enough for me to make an announcement and walk away from a problem. I want to continue to engage at a provincial level, at a community level, to drive solutions that actually work for communities. If we succeed here, the opportunity for Canada is enormous. If we can unlock the economic potential of communities by allowing the workers who want to come and fill gaps in the economy to live in those communities, Canada is positioned as well as any country in the world to have a full recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, put more people to work, and increase our overall wealth to fund the services that Canadians depend upon. Okay. I'm happy to be able to play a leadership role here. Looking forward to the challenge.
Appreciate your time today, Minister. I know we're going to be talking about this again. Thanks for speaking to us.
I'm sure. I'll look forward to it. Thank you so much.